There are moments in life that shake you to the core. Things that seem like setbacks, failures, mistakes. That betrayal that shattered your trust. That abandonment that made you feel invisible. That silence that echoed louder than screams. You thought it was random. You thought it was punishment. You even questioned if heaven had gone silent on you. But here's the truth. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't spiritual neglect. It was permission. Permission from above. To take you out of the ordinary and into the fire. Because fire doesn't destroy the chosen. It reveals them. And if you've been through what most wouldn't survive, it's not because you're cursed. It's because you were called. God doesn't use unbroken vessels. He anoints the ones who bled in secret. He crowns the ones who were crushed behind closed doors. And every betrayal you went through, it wasn't the end of you. It was the activation of what's been sleeping inside you for too long. Today, I'm going to show you something few people talk about. The 5 betrayals every chosen one must endure before they are trusted by God. These are not just events. They are awakenings, spiritual triggers, divine tools to strip you of what you don't need and make space for what you were born to carry. This is not a message of comfort. It's a wake-up call, a prophetic unveiling of what your soul has always known, but the world kept trying to bury. And if this word hits deep, don't just watch in silence. Like this video if your spirit is already stirring. Subscribe if you're done pretending and ready to walk in the raw truth. And comment 99 right now. Because biblically, 99 means the one is missing. And maybe today, that one is you. Let's begin. They were supposed to protect you, the ones who shared your last name, the ones you laughed with at dinner tables, took pictures with at holidays, trusted with your most innocent self. But one day, the warmth changed. The eyes that once looked at you with pride started avoiding you. The words turned colder, the atmosphere heavier, and you started to feel it. Like you were too much, too intense, too emotional, too different. But let me tell you something no one dared to say. You weren't too much. You were too called. Because when the divine places weight on a person, that weight becomes uncomfortable for those around them. Not because you did something wrong, but because you remind them of everything they've ignored in themselves. Your dreams? They threatened their complacency. Your hunger? It exposed their indifference. Your light? It burned their shadows. So they distanced themselves, mocked your sensitivity, laughed at your convictions, and you thought it was your fault. But it wasn't. Just like Joseph, his brothers didn't hate him because of who he was. They hated him because of what he carried. A dream, a destiny, a divine map hidden inside his soul. They didn't know how to love it, so they tried to bury it. You went through the same. The rejection wasn't random, it was prophetic. God saw what they couldn't. He saw that if they had accepted you, you would have settled. You would have stayed quiet to keep the peace. You would have conformed. And heaven doesn't birth revolutionaries in comfort zones. So yes, God allowed it. The disrespect, the silence, the strange looks at the dinner table, the passive-aggressive jokes, the "you're too much" comments. Because had they embraced you, you might have never met yourself. Not the version that cries for approval, but the one that walks with purpose. You were never meant to blend in. You were never meant to fit. You were meant to break the mold, even if that meant breaking their expectations. And here's the mystery. Sometimes the most painful rejection is not a curse. It's a divine relocation. God didn't just allow their rejection. He used it to shift you, out of rooms too small, out of dynamics too shallow, out of patterns too familiar. You were never theirs to keep. You were heaven's to release. And maybe they still don't understand you. Maybe they never will. But your identity is not up for debate. Your value is not determined by who claps when you speak, but by who called you before you were born. If you've ever cried alone in your room after trying so hard to be enough for your own blood, Hear this. You were rejected at the table of man, so you could be positioned at the table of kings. Don't get bitter. Get ready. Because the first betrayal wasn't just a heartbreak. It was the beginning of your becoming. And what's coming next will not just shake your past. It'll make everyone who doubted you realize they were standing next to royalty in disguise. But this was only the first wound. There's another betrayal that's even harder to detect. And it wears a smile. It speaks your language. It knows your secrets. Brace yourself. We're about to go deeper. This one doesn't come with red flags. It comes with laughter. With secrets shared at 2 a.m. With inside jokes and whispered prayers. This one looks like safety. Until it isn't. Because the second betrayal doesn't attack you from the front. It wraps itself around you like comfort. And waits until your guard is down. It's not a stranger's knife. It's the blade you handed someone thinking they'd protect you with it. But they used it to cut you instead. This is the Judas effect. The betrayal that walks beside you, not against you. The one who prayed with you, cried with you, watched you build your faith, only to turn around and burn the foundation behind your back. And the worst part? It wasn't loud. It didn't come with confrontation. It came quietly. Subtle shifts in energy. Less eye contact. A delay in response. A coldness in the room you couldn't quite explain. But your spirit knew. Long before your heart caught up. They saw the calling on you. Felt the weight of your assignment. Heard the echo of heaven when you spoke. And instead of honoring it, they envied it. Not because you tried to shine, but because your light started to expose their shadows. They didn't clap for your elevation. They clung to your past version, the one they could control, the one that still needed them, the one that didn't know yet what you carried. But the moment you began to evolve, they began to retreat. And when you looked around for the friend who once celebrated you the loudest, you found silence, or worse. You found them in conversations they swore they'd never have without you. This betrayal hurts not because they were perfect, but because they knew your pain. They were there when you were broken. They were trusted with your tears. They knew where your scars were, and they pressed them anyway. Like Judas, who wasn't a soldier, wasn't an outsider. He was seated at the table, fed by the same hand he would later betray. But here's what you must understand. God allowed it, not to punish you, not to isolate you, but to reveal what couldn't go with you into your next level. Because not everyone is assigned to your promotion. Some are only meant to be characters in your preparation. And if he had let them stay, they would have corrupted the blessing, contaminated the room, turned divine opportunity into delayed destiny. So God used the betrayal as a scalpel to surgically remove attachments that looked loyal but were leaking. It wasn't abandonment. It was protection in disguise. Because if they hadn't walked away, you would have invited them into rooms that were never theirs to enter. Sometimes, divine elevation requires brutal separation. So let them go. Let the silence echo. Let the empty chair remain vacant. God is not asking you to fill it again. He's asking you to recognize why it had to be emptied. And the truth is, you're better now. Clearer, wiser, sharper. This was never about revenge. It was about refinement. You don't need more friends. You need more discernment. And now, you have it. But don't exhale yet. Because the next betrayal won't come from the outside. It'll rise from within. And it's the most dangerous of them all. This betrayal doesn't show up in conversations. It doesn't leave you with unanswered messages or broken promises. No, this one is far more dangerous. Because it wears your face. It speaks in your voice. And it knows exactly where to strike. It's the betrayal that happens in the silence of your own thoughts. The moment you doubt yourself right before the breakthrough. The whisper that slips into your soul when you're already tired, already stretched, already vulnerable. It sounds like, maybe I'm not ready. Maybe I'm not chosen. Maybe this was all in my head. And you entertain it. Not because you're weak, but because the journey has been long. The wounds feel fresh, the scars still ache. You've carried so much alone that now even your own shadow feels like pressure. And you start to shrink. Not physically, spiritually. You still show up, you still post, you still smile. But something inside you is withdrawing, folding in on itself, caving under the weight of invisible lies. This is what happens when your soul starts negotiating with fear. And don't be mistaken, it happens to the greatest. Elijah, fresh off calling fire down from heaven, collapsed in a cave, asking God to take his life. Peter, who walked with Jesus himself, denied him, not once, but 3 times to people he wasn't even threatened by. Why? Because exhaustion opens the door to distortion. Because even warriors need to be reminded of their why. But listen carefully. Your weakness is not evidence that God has changed his mind. It's proof that the mission is real. If you weren't stepping into something massive, your old self wouldn't be so terrified. Your insecurities wouldn't be screaming this loud unless you were on the edge of something sacred. Self-betrayal is the enemy's final attempt. Because when he can't take you out through family and can't break you through friendships, he tries to make you destroy yourself. That's why the thoughts hit hardest at night. That's why you question your worth when no one else is around. That's why you start disqualifying yourself with the very same voice God once used to call you. But here's what hell doesn't want you to realize. You are not your thoughts. You are not your feelings. You are not your fatigue. You are the oil that's being crushed out of this pressure. You are the voice God is refining in the dark. You are the vessel that still stood after everything tried to silence you. And yes, there will be moments when you'll want to walk away. There will be mornings when getting out of bed feels like a mountain. But even then, even in the fog, you are still chosen. You are still seen. You are still wrapped in the fingerprints of a God who never needed you to be perfect, only present. The fact that you've doubted, the fact that you've wrestled with your own identity, the fact that you've thought of giving up, none of it disqualifies you. It confirms you're on holy ground. Because heaven never calls the flawless, he calls the faithful. And faith isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep walking while fear follows you like a shadow. So if your own voice has become your enemy, it's time to reclaim it. Speak life again. Speak destiny again. Remind yourself of what God already said, because he doesn't take it back. And just when you thought the inner war was over, another wave is coming. But this time, it's not about your mind. It's about the one who once led you, the one who raised you up, and now wants to shut you down. We're about to step into the betrayal that breaks trust on a spiritual level. Get ready. This one is sacred, because it starts with trust, with admiration, with honor. They were your covering, your teacher, your example. You watched how they moved, how they prayed, how they commanded rooms, and something in you whispered, I want to be like that. So you followed, you served, you submitted, you gave them access to the deepest parts of your spirit because you believed they saw something in you worth shaping. And maybe they did, at first. But something shifted. You didn't force it. You didn't fight for it. It just shifted. Your oil began to thicken. Your voice gained weight. Your discernment became sharper. And without warning, admiration turned to intimidation. You weren't trying to outshine anyone. You were just finally stepping into what God always placed in you. But instead of celebrating your growth, they started seeing it as a threat. And that's when the betrayal hit. Not with a knife, but with silence, distance, dismissive comments masked as correction, spiritual manipulation dressed as protection. Suddenly, the one who once called you son or daughter starts calling you rebellious, just because your obedience is no longer to them, but to God. This is not just personal. This is spiritual warfare. Because what you're dealing with is not just the heart of a man, it's the spirit of Saul. And Saul didn't hate David because he sinned. He hated him because the anointing shifted. because heaven moved forward and Saul refused to. What hurts most is that you still love them, still honor them, still carry the lessons they gave you. But you've outgrown the system. You've outgrown the cage. You've outgrown the watered-down fire that once sustained you, because now God is requiring more. And more can't be found where the fire has already gone out. This betrayal feels like spiritual abandonment, but it's actually a divine graduation. God had to let them reject you, because as long as you were accepted there, you would have stayed there. Loyal, committed, stuck. He allowed the distance not to punish you, but to deliver you from an approval addiction. You were never meant to depend on a human voice more than the voice of the Holy Spirit. And what felt like dishonor was actually divine redirection. Not every spiritual father is eternal. Some are scaffolding, meant to support you for a season, but never meant to stay when the structure is finished. And that's okay. You're not betraying them by moving forward. You're obeying the call that they once helped you hear, the painful irony. They were the ones who taught you to hear God, but now they're offended that you actually do. But let me say this with clarity. You are not rebellious. You are not proud. You are not too much. You are simply awakening. God is removing the middlemen. He's calling his chosen ones to walk with him directly, unfiltered, uncontrolled, uncompromised. And yes, it hurts. Yes, you feel like you're walking alone. Yes, you've wept over the empty chairs of those you never imagined would leave you. But hear me, their absence is not a curse. It's confirmation. Because if Saul hadn't thrown the spear, David might have stayed longer than he should. And if they hadn't turned on you, you might have never learned how to walk in full authority, without needing a second opinion. Now, you carry a mantle, one that doesn't beg for recognition, one that doesn't need a title to operate, one that moves in power, because it was forged through fire, not handed down through hierarchy. And as you keep walking, you'll realize something deeper. This wasn't just about them losing access to you. It was about you gaining direct access to the throne. But don't get too comfortable, because the final betrayal isn't from them. It's one that stings on a soul level. One that comes disguised as destiny, but is really the final test before the crown. And now we arrive at the betrayal no one talks about. The one that feels the most confusing, the most intimate, the most devastating. Not from a friend, not from family, not even from yourself. This betrayal felt like it came from God. You fasted, you prayed, you stayed faithful when everyone else walked away. You showed up to church, gave your last dollar, lifted your hands even when they were trembling, and still, everything fell apart. You were obedient, and still broken. You followed the rules, and still got rejected. You honored the call, and ended up alone. And somewhere in the silence, you asked the question most chosen ones are too afraid to admit. God, where are you? Because how do you explain divine silence when you've done everything right? How do you reconcile prophetic words with painful realities? How do you still believe when heaven seems quiet? This is where many lose the battle, not in public collapse, but in private confusion. This is the betrayal that makes you feel like your faith deceived you. But here's the truth. Hell never wanted you to hear. It wasn't abandonment. It was preparation. Because when God gets ready to trust someone with glory, he first walks them through fire. And the fire doesn't just burn what's around you, it burns what's in you. The need for constant reassurance, the addiction to applause, the desire to always understand. God had to let things go silent. So you'd learn to trust his presence even when you can't hear his voice. He had to strip you of your formulas, your routines, your emotional safety nets, so that when you finally rise, it won't be because of what you know, but because of who you've become. Every unanswered prayer was shaping you. Every closed door was protecting you. Every night you laid on the floor begging for a word and got nothing but tears. was hollowing out space for a greater weight of glory. Because authority is expensive, and God does not place eternal mantles on untested shoulders. You thought you were being punished. You thought you were forgotten. You thought He left you. But in reality, He was doing His deepest work, in silence, in shadow, in surrender. Because the kind of power you're about to walk in can't be built on emotions. It must be built on encounters. Private, crushing, holy encounters. And the truth is, if God had answered you too soon, you would have run into your calling with contaminated motives. If He had comforted you too early, you would have depended on comfort, not character. If He had explained everything, you would have never learned how to believe anyway. The betrayal you thought was divine neglect was actually divine strategy. You weren't being punished. You were being purified, stripped, refined, set apart. And now? Now you're dangerous. Not because of your charisma, not because of your influence, but because you survived the silence and still stayed faithful, still stayed humble, still showed up. You've been entrusted with pain, so you could carry power. You've been trained in hiddenness, so you can operate in holiness. You've been betrayed at every level, so that now nothing can be stolen from you that God hasn't already redeemed. And just when you thought this was the end, just when you thought the wilderness would swallow you whole, something is shifting. Because every betrayal was a setup. Every tear was a seed. Every no was a redirection. Every delay was divine incubation. And now, the heavens are about to reveal why it had to be this way. But before the final curtain opens, before the crown is placed, there's one last thing you need to hear. One last truth that will change everything. Stay with me. What comes next is not just the end of the pain, it's the beginning of glory. Listen to me, and let your spirit catch this. You didn't survive all of that for nothing. You weren't betrayed just to be broken. You weren't abandoned just to be forgotten. You weren't crushed just to stay in pieces. Heaven saw every moment. Heaven wrote every detail. Heaven designed every detour. You've been through betrayal, not once, not twice, but on every level imaginable. And yet you're still here. Still breathing. Still carrying oil. Why? Because you are not just a survivor. You are a sign. A living, walking, undeniable sign that God raises up those who've been torn down. That's why the enemy came so hard. Not because of your past, but because of your future. Not because of who you were, but because of what you were always destined to birth. The betrayals didn't bury you. They branded you, marked you with a mantle that can't be copied, a fire that can't be faked, and a mission that cannot be stopped. So let this truth settle deep. You were chosen, and no betrayal can cancel what heaven already approved. You are rising now, not as the person who was broken, but as the weapon that was forged. And when you walk into this next season, you're not walking in timid. You're not walking in wounded. You're walking in warfare mode. You're walking in glory. You're walking in prophetic proof that what the enemy meant for evil, God turned into fire. This is your divine comeback, not to get revenge, not to prove them wrong, but to prove God was right all along when He looked at you and said, "This one is mine." Comment below. I was built in betrayal, but born for glory. If this word hit your spirit, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and send it to someone who's walking through the same fire. Because this isn't just a message, it's a movement. And you're not just a part of it. You are it. Now go. Walk in the oil. Speak from the scars. Move like someone who's already seen the end and knows victory is inevitable. You're not coming back the same. You're coming back crowned.